I think he's terrible. I think, look, we're paying, I call him too late. He's always late. But he wasn't late with Biden before the election. He was cutting him like crazy.
President Trump cheering a new White House report showing that tariffs have not caused inflation. He's posting on Truth Social, quote, "Someone should show this new study to too late Powell." He goes on and finishes with, "Cut interest rates, Jerome." Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal reporting that the National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett and former Fed Governor Kevin Warsh are competing to be the next Fed chair. They're definitely more aligned with the president's vision.
Economic growth in the U.S. is poised to boom, but it's being held down by bad economic policies coming from the central bank. Bad supervision policies, bad monetary policies, and a very confusing set of standards as we've gone from last year to this year. So interest rates should be lower. The balance sheet should be smaller.
I'm trying to start a bad rumor and say that I'm voting for Larry Kudlow as Fed chair. That is a rumor. You've made it very clear that you're not. We love having you here, gainfully employed as our colleague. But weigh in sort of on this big debate.
I'm pretty busy at Fox.
You're pretty busy. Weigh in, your thoughts.
Look, these are two brilliant people, Kevin Warsh and Kevin Hassett. They are also dear friends of mine. By the way, I believe the president, when he mulls through this, and he's got a couple names in his mind, and I think the stories that are coming out are fairly accurate. But I think Scott Bessent will be part of that mix when the president makes his final decision. I'm not saying yes, no, yes, no. I think any of those guys will go in and really shake up the Fed. Okay, they will try to do to the Federal Reserve what Mr. Trump is doing to all the other agencies, and the deep state is going to have a big problem. You got to change. You got to change the board, the governors of the board. That's a little slow, although one seat does come open in January, that Kugler seat. Then, of course, you'll have the chairman, who's a what seat. Jay Powell's not going to stick around, for heaven's sakes. But you also have to shake up the composition of the regional Fed banks, okay, which have all been appointed by Democrats, okay? And this is really something, they all have to be approved by the chairman of the Fed. It's very important, and they do get to the Oval Office, all right? That has to be changed. Then you have the staff of the board, the economic staff, all of whom donate to Democrats, all of whom run these crazy left-wing models that we were talking about in the last segment. Yeah. You just got to make enormous changes. There are some good ones in there, but there are a lot of bad ones, and there are a lot of bad ones at the senior level. And look, Jay Powell, who is not a monetary guy, right? It's not his field, right? Basically is the mouthpiece for the economic staff of the Federal Reserve Board. Yeah. All right? And that is not a position he should be in. And that's why he fluctuates so much. You know, it's data-driven. Oh, now it's future-driven. It's this, it's that. Nobody knows what he's talking about. That was part of the criticism that Kevin Warsh made. He's in over his head. All right? Warsh, who was a governor for half a dozen years, or Hassett, who was a senior staff guy for half a dozen years, they are monetary experts, okay? And they know who to replace, and they can hit the ground running. And the deep state inside the Federal Reserve will be changed if any of those guys come in. That's the way I look at it.
This is maybe sort of a two-part question, Jackie. I think Larry's bringing up a really good point about diversity of thought. And I think in 2020, we were all like, diversity is the color of your skin or this sex or gender. But in the Fed, you need diversity of thought. You need new thinkers because the models clearly are broken. Phillips curve doesn't work anymore. We need a new model. Curious about how you think about that, especially your comments on the regional Fed chairs, which was interesting.
I would just say that the same way Donald Trump is reshaping our budget, how we bring revenue into this country, how we spend money, that applies to this idea of having new schools and streams of thought within the Federal Reserve, because we're just not doing things the way we used to. But we've been such a country, and both parties are guilty of just going along with the status quo. He's the first one to come and, you know, really start cracking skulls and changing things for the better. I said this in the previous block, but I'll say it again. I think we're going to look back in history and just, I don't even think you can understand the magnitude of what he's doing right now until it plays out over time. And so, you know, there is the deep state is entrenched everywhere. They will resist. They will continue to resist. They'll continue to take him down and make it as hard as possible for him to do what he needs to do. But I think he's shown us in 6 months' time, essentially, that he's going to do it no matter what, and that systems will change. And so I see this taking new shape. And it's also what is beautiful about our democracy and our country, that we have pendulum swings, that we can go one way and realize that we've made a mistake and come back and, you know, correct the error of our ways in another 4 years.
Listen, the president of the United States has the right to put in somebody at the Fed and chairman and governors and Reserve Bank presidents to implement his policies. He was elected by the people.
But you're not worried about independence?
They were elected by nobody. Look, the Congress has the authority to, you know, if they ever wanted to do it, to reclaim the value of the dollar and our money. The Congress doesn't even mess with it. This myth of Fed independence.
Is that just a myth?
It is
the
a myth.
markets are trying to tell us that the independence is real, that you want to keep the two separate.
I basically think it's a phony argument. I mean, I'm just going to say, politicians shouldn't run the Federal Reserve. Okay, I buy that. But the argument about independence is an argument taken up by people who want the status quo.
Okay.
They want the status quo. I want perestroika. I want to go in, take out the deep state, have enormous reforms, have different personnel, start to deregulate the economy. Remember, the Federal Reserve has very important deregulation functions with respect to the banking system and the entire financial system. And by the way, the Fed is too damn powerful.
Well, it's okay.
Can I just finish this? They believe they run the country and the world.
Yeah.
Well, that's not what their mandate really is, to keep the value of money stable, as in a gold or commodity price rule, and make sure the inflation rate is low.
Skate in your lane, Jerome Powell.
Yeah,
well,
I mean, they think they're all. I mean, here's this guy. Wait, just 1 second. He's getting up there now. He's making speech. He is actually arguing against the president of the United States. Yep. Who elected Jay Powell?
Right.
Remind me of that.
No one.
Oh, wait a minute. Who elected Donald Trump? He won the popular vote.
Yeah.
All right. Second point I want to make is, Powell's getting up there talking about tariffs and trade policy, which is not part of the Fed's remit.
Yeah.
Since when did somebody say you're in charge of tariffs? Since when did somebody say you should weigh in on? I mean, you want to make a deal with the European Union? Honestly, this just crazy. The other point that Trump makes, all these other central banks have been cutting interest rates. The average interest rate for the big countries, Europe, Canada, China, Japan, it's about 2%. What are we doing at 4.5%? The inflation rate is 1.5% since January at an annual rate. And the studies show that these goods.
A 2-year at a 387.
What's he looking at?
Argue
right.
How
And he gets up and gives speeches. He just did another one in Portugal, or wherever it was. I don't know. Someplace in Europe. He gives a speech, and all these little central bankers go applaud. Oh, nice going, Jay. Nice going. You should fight Trump. That's because they don't like Trump. Okay. So I want to send them that. You know, I want that's another picture. I want to link it in and a text message of those B2s flying over Iran.
Oh, you're sending it to them too?
Yeah, I think I'm going to send it to the central bankers as well as the trade negotiators.
Can I take 10 seconds to emphatically
You
agree
only have
with
10.
Larry,
Yes, great.
but also say, if you want real change, the remit of the Fed right now is prices, but it's also unemployment.
Yes.
And they've got to get rid of the second piece.
I know.
Because that's where all the politics come
Or look at it this way, Brian. If they get the first piece is price stability, okay?
Yes.
All right. If you get the first piece right, the second piece falls into place.
Yeah. Okay.
This is what
I agree with that.
There are two Fed heads in my time, going way, 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 who understood this and talked about it. One was Paul Volcker, who slayed inflation.
Right.
Reagan let him do it, and it was painful at times. The second one was Alan Greenspan.
Yeah.
Two brilliant Fed chairmen who understood that domestic price stability would lead to low unemployment.
We're going to leave it there. Great block, Larry.